Right, so after 8 years, Derek McInnes is no longer Aberdeen manager. It's a big change at Pittodrie, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about who the next manager will be. Quickly, though, reaction to Derek leaving. Greg, we'll go with you.
It's disappointing the way it soured at the end because the first 3 4 years was incredible to be a Dons fan when it was actually entertaining football. We had a good entertaining squad, and then what was it? Probably that 2017 Cup final against Celtic. It felt like it should have peaked there. I think Graham Shinney said that in an interview with Big Cy Ferry, our favourite, and that should have been the peak. And then it kind of just fizzled out, and he could never replace the folk he lost. It's been a long time coming. It's disappointing it came to what it did, but it was definitely the right time for him to move on because he looked like a man of ideas. We've said it a million times when we've talked about it. He looked completely lost with what he was doing. He didn't. There was no direction other than hoofball with insert different long, tall, blonde, wank English striker. Like, so it was definitely time for both to move on.
Flem, from an outside perspective, what were you thinking about the sacking? Or not
Well, it's
sacking, I should say. It's technically not a sacking, but
technically not a sacking.
He
Yeah,
was he jumped before he was pushed. We'll put
yeah.
it that way.
Um, I think it was both a surprise and not a surprise, if you know what I mean. It's a
Yeah,
surprise that it was just done on a random Monday. That's what it felt like, rather than after the result. It felt like it should have either been done ages before, or they should have just waited to the end of the season because that's the way it was going anyway. But I don't think anyone's surprised that he's left. I think he would have left at the end of the season anyway. It's just kind of the results have definitely not gone his way,
that
so
was
they've
a
just ripped the
that was
plaster
apparently the
off him.
rumor. Was apparently Cormac went,
Stuart
"Oh, you can have to
McCall,
the end of the season." Yeah,
Stuart McCall said it apparently on Sports Sound, but nonetheless, we're going to be looking at the new manager. We're looking forward, not so much backwards. We're going to go kind of through three managers, not necessarily that we're advocating for, but that are not so well known that we've had a look at. I say not so well known as managers in Scotland that we're going to have a look at. We'll do that in a bit. But one thing I want to look at first is what would your criteria be? If you're Dave Cormack and you're going, this is what I want in a manager, because the things that stick out for me are a more attacking brand of football. And that doesn't mean that you have to bring in the next Marcelo Bielsa, right? It just means someone who's ready to commit an extra man forward that maybe wants to play with two attacking fullbacks, not just one half attacking fullback, which was probably how I described Derek McInnes' style a little bit. Also, someone who's willing to bring through youth players because Aberdeen do have a lot of really good, talented young players right now. And I suppose someone who's also fine with the idea that your good players will be available for the right price. Not someone who's going to take a bit of a hissy fit if you sell his best player, because there are some managers that will do that. They have to accept that Aberdeen are looking to be a bit of a selling club. Um, go back to Flev and then we'll go to Greg. What would your criteria be if you're Dave Cormack looking for a new manager?
No, I definitely think the entertaining attacking style of football is needed because it's now you need to go from boring to not boring. That's what I feel. That's what most fans want. They don't want to go from
yeah.
a boring brand of football to another boring brand of football. I would also say a key his criteria would be someone that's comfortable working under a director of football. Because I feel like when that came in with McInnes there, you could tell as soon as the keys were kind of taken away from him, he just looked defeated. So you need someone who's willing to, he's not going to have a say in all the signings. He's just going to have to work.
I suppose that was the keys were taken away from him only with Dave Cormack being there. We don't have a director of football there at the moment, but I mean, there is the rumour that that could happen. But, I suppose, yeah, Dave Cormack probably didn't give him as much free rein as Stuart Milne, or as is the rumour.
Yeah, and also, did you actually sign anyone on a permanent in January, or was it all loans?
That was all loans.
He got McCrory was.
Yeah, McCrory
I
was.
think we got McCrory permanent, but that doesn't really count.
But yeah, that was made permanent more earlier, obviously. But yeah, the rest loans, which you could put down partly to COVID, you could put down to it being January. I don't know what to say on that one, but yeah. So
I think that's also just the way the market's going at the minute. It's the way it's going to go in the next few years. Is where clubs like the Dons, even like United and that, they're going to rely on loans from down south and abroad more. So I don't think you can really associate that with just the Dons.
When you look at that, though, I mean, I suppose some criteria in a manager would be where you hope they look for their signings.
Yeah.
Aberdeen will have to make a lot this summer. So for the both of you, I mean, what kind of preference would you like the new manager to have?
In terms of what, like transfer strategy?
The type of players they want to sign, what areas they might want to look, or the type of, not necessarily saying positions, because they're going to need at one point to look at all positions.
Everyone.
but but basically age profile, where to look for them, the kind of players they're looking for. McInnes, you would say sometimes his favourites were former players. They were, kind of League One, England, maybe good in League Two, or other players at some of the kind of Premiership clubs below them in Scotland, or a loan from a decent English side.
See what McInnes had at the start. I think that's similar to what you need now, where he had youth with players like Pollitt, but he also brought in experience through Robson. I think that he had that very good at the start, and I feel like that's what the new manager will need to bring in as well. We had that experience in the changing room, but he also had exciting players. I know Logan came in a bit later, but he was young. He was like, no one really knew him, but he was an exciting player for us to bring in. Not so much now, but that kind of format of having players, like young, exciting players like we had with Pollitt, we had Hayes, we still had McGinn, obviously, but that kind of direction where it's actually entertaining and not bringing in Ash Taylor or like bringing back someone or someone that we've been linked with for like 2 years. Like that seemed to be the way. It was like McInnes would get stubborn, and then 2 years after he first wanted Dylan McGeoch, we would get McGeoch, and we'd be like, "Oh, yeah, that's fine." So maybe just something different. I think it's just something different.
Flem, is there the areas you think could be good for a manager in Scotland to look at that maybe McInnes didn't? And I know that the one kind of foray into Hernandez didn't go well, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't try again.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the two signings that Aberdeen's made in Ferguson and McCrory are the perfect examples of signings they should be making anyway. So they should be aiming for that 20 to 22 range. People who can make an impact for the club, but also have a great sell-on value. And I think it's not going to be the manager that's going to be signing players. I think that's the idea we're getting from Cormac now. It's going to be a director of football in there. So I think the philosophy is going to be, we're going to sign these players who are 19 to 23, ready to make an impact on the club, and we'll have good sell-on value. In terms of places they should look, Hernandez was a good shout there. He's not going to be the be-all and end-all of players coming across from abroad. There's plenty of talent out there that they could get.
They shouldn't be shutting the door on that like avenue of players just because Hernandez didn't work. It sounds like it could have been down to a number of things. So we should definitely still keep looking over that way. It's definitely something we need to keep open-minded about as fans as well. It'd be very easy for everyone to go, oh, it's another boy coming over from South America. Hernandez didn't work. But there was so much hype around Hernandez. It's definitely something we should keep interested in.
And I mean, I suppose Hernandez, while South American, was signed from Norway, where I think that there is interest in players there. Before we move on, I think the one thing I was going to say, you mentioned young players. I think that is smart. But one thing that has always struck me about these Aberdeen teams is people want to win trophies, and you look at the team and they've got very little cumulative things that they have won at other clubs. So yes, when you want to sign young players, if you can maybe sign one or two, potentially in their 30s, who come with a winning pedigree, I think that makes the difference when you're in a cup final and a cup semi-final against Celtic in that like kind of last minute where Roniet scores. Maybe having someone who just has been there, done that, it adds that extra mentality. But that's just something that's been at me for a while.
So along the similar lines of what I said earlier with Robson, he brought in a player that had a winning mentality. He'd won like pretty much everything at Celtic. So to bring in a player like that, just to have around the club, he might not even need to play, but as much as other players, but just have someone with that experience of actually winning.
Okay, so then looking at our three managers, we'll go with Greg to start. So we kind of looked at some of these managers. The rules that we gave each other were basically don't do one who's managed in Scotland before. Now, that doesn't mean that hasn't been ones who have played in Scotland before. Originally, Greg, I think you were going to go for Darren Fletcher, and he still remains high in the odds, but he's been given a promotion at Manchester United, so that makes no sense.
He's basically ruled out at this point, is he?
Yeah, I think it was really narrow potential in the first place, but especially now for promotion. So who have you had a look at?
I went for Sean Maloney. He's born up here. I believe his granddad lived just down the street from mine. New Deer, big shout out to New Deer. But he's obviously out in Belgium at the minute. I think he took the under-20s at Celtic for about a year or so, if I remember his Wikipedia correctly. It's one of those along the lines of what we're saying, where it would be interesting to have someone young with fresh ideas, someone who's never taken a first team. He's going to come in with a philosophy, hopefully of a decent style of football. You look at the way Belgium's been playing, to be out with that setup and come out to what is actually quite an attractive job. We joke about Aberdeen being pish, but it's quite an interesting job for someone like a Sean Maloney for a first job to come up and then hopefully push for a second place, take a couple of trophies. And it's unrealistic to say it's not going to be a stepping stone. Everyone knows it's a stepping stone, but it could be a great opportunity for him to come up here, impose his like philosophy of football on what would be a blank slate. You come into summer, it's going to be his team, well, along with the director of football. So no, I think it would actually be quite interesting. The one doubt I have is fans, because they seem quite annoyed that he chose Celtic over us a couple of years ago. So I think there was rumours of him coming up to retire up here, have a final season, and then go into coaching. But then did he not choose? Was that what it was? And then he ended up choosing
as a player. He signed as a coach, and I think the reason he
Yeah,
didn't
but I
sign for
remember-
us was because of an injury.
Right, fair. But I remember that being the rumour, so I don't know if fans would latch onto that. But I genuinely think it'd be quite an interesting appointment, and he would come with a bit of like experience. You're not chucking someone in at the deep end.
Do you think there's something to be said for these coaches who, instead of jumping straight into a manager job, he's had a bit of experience in the coaching staff, and not just at one place? It's not like he's, if we say now appointed Barry Robson, where he retired at Aberdeen, he coached at Aberdeen for a bit, where Sean Maloney retired, coached at Celtic for a bit, he's done a bit with Belgium. Does it just add that extra element of experience that really helps?
Yeah, and you also look at the level that. Sorry if I'm on you.
No, I was going to say I would say so, especially because Robson's only coached in the youth team when McInnes has been there as well. So who's
Robson
to say?
Just more as an example, but
yeah, you know what I mean. But Maloney, yeah, it would be interesting, and I think the thing with fans, as you said, they always get annoyed when you say it's a stepping stone. But that's just a fact. That's what most of Scottish football is now.
Yeah,
and I suppose if you look back revisionally, a lot of fans probably, okay, not the Rangers one, but if Derek McInnes had went to Sunderland when that happened, obviously people were happy when that didn't happen, and obviously people didn't want to happen at the time. Looking back at how things turned out, that might have worked out better for all parties.
Yeah, potentially.
So you probably, that maybe, these things are always short-lived, and I'm sure it won't happen, but you would hope that sticks in fans' minds, where if there's a new manager comes in, he has 2 really good years, and then is linked with somewhere else, they go, maybe this is a good progression. Because if anything, it shows good for you.
Well, it's like, even if, right, so in theory, if Maloney does come, he gets 2 good years and then goes down to a Wigan or something, at least it keeps it fresh. And if you get into that habit of taking in young managers who want to use it as like for their CV, like, it sounds a bit weird to say it like that, but if they're coming in and they're trying to make that first impression in football, and you have that every 2 years, you're going to hit some duds, but at least it's keeping it fresh. The problem with McInnes was he was there for 8 years, and by the end, there was nothing fresh.
Yeah.
So that's Sean Maloney. Flem, who have you been looking at?
So I was looking at David Wagner, and I think this is a bit of an outside shout because I don't know if he would go to Aberdeen, but he has been linked with Aberdeen.
I think Sean Maloney is probably the only one of the 3 that we've picked that isn't a particularly long shout, but it's more interesting this way.
Yeah, 100%. So we all remember him from Huddersfield when he got promoted with Huddersfield and through the playoffs, and he managed to keep them up. And then he resigned that January. But when he went to Schalke, it kind of all went downhill for him. So they ended up the last half of last season, not this season. He went on an 18-game streak where he didn't win a game, and he was sacked. And that sounds really bad, right? But
then you give the respect of Schalke.
Yeah. But then you look at Schalke this year, and they nearly broke the record for the amount of games they lost in a row. So you could actually argue it's more down to Schalke than the management. They've gone through like 3 managers this season. So it's not necessarily, and they've literally probably sacked, I can't remember how many people they've sacked, but they've pretty much sacked everyone at this point. There's only players left, that's it. So I don't really blame Wagner for that. I think the good thing about Wagner is it'd be like a soft reset for him. And he plays like in Scotland, we don't really realise we're kind of like slightly tactically behind everyone else. We don't really evolve at the same pace. Whereas I feel like if he brought a guiding press type of style, which he used at Schalke and Huddersfield, that could be pretty interesting with Aberdeen. That'd be something completely different for fans to see.
You say that, but also, sorry, it was, you see that you would have whoever Celtic are about to hire, you'd imagine they'd hopefully be going for someone a bit more creative. You've got Gerrard doing very interesting things. If you could get someone like that in Aberdeen, you've got 3 very interesting managers trying to do different things. And I think it could only help the branding of our game rather than pub league
Yeah, even at a lower level, David Martindale is generally playing better
Yeah,
football with
exactly.
Livingston than the majority of the league. And that's
Yeah,
why they've done so
exactly.
well so early, because this is a style that he's using that has been used elsewhere for years already. But people were a bit
Mhm.
shocked when it started getting used up here. And he also proved that you don't need Liverpool quality players to do it.
Yeah.
So, just in terms of David Wagner, then, Flam, is there any other particular key points that stuck out to you? Is there anything that kind of feels like he would be,
I
an
feel like
extra bonus?
he manages to get a lot out of players. Like players that shouldn't be playing at a level, he gets a lot out of them. Like he had Danny Ward for a while as well, and he was unreal for Huddersfield in the Championship. So I just feel like with the players, especially young players as well, I feel like he'd do very well. I mean, he managed the second team Borussia Dortmund to start with, so that shows that he's good at developing young players. And as you said, Aberdeen's got a lot of young players that are just waiting for a chance, and I feel like he'd be willing to give them a chance as well. And he also has worked under a director of football, so and that's all he's done his career. So that's kind of a bonus. I
Okay.
do feel it's a long shot, but it's not impossible.
See, with
You
these
know,
kind of names, though, I was always wondering, would there be enough? Like, if you're talking money wise, but then was McInnes not matched wage wise than what Sunderland were going to pay them? Was the rumor not about
It was either
17,000 a week?
Sunderland or
Obviously,
Rangers at one of
so
those
it was going to be about,
times.
was it 17K a week or something mental like that?
I think it
Obviously,
would
I
be
don't think they're
rumours,
going to be
but
able
a
to
lot
put,
more than we were playing any player.
yeah, yeah. So I think they're going to have a bit of spending, but obviously they're not going to want to go too much because it's obviously, I think everyone's quite tight for money. They're not going to want to be splashing the cash, especially when they're going to have to be bringing in lots of players. So I don't know if that's something we've got to take into account.
Yeah, I suppose it will be, especially in the COVID world. This guy that I'm going to mention maybe would cost some money. Again, it's a long shot because it's Enzo Maresca, who at the moment is also linked to Celtic. Now, clearly, if he gets offered the Celtic job, he's not going to go to Aberdeen. But I just don't know if he will get the Celtic job. I think if he does, the suggestion is it would be, again, director of football, Maresca, which shows Scottish football slowly catching up pretty much everywhere else. But he doesn't feel like the big name that Celtic probably need to bring in at this point to do it. Now, of
Paul
course,
Lambert.
we know, well, Paul Lambert, obviously, yeah. We know that we know that at the end of the day, big names sometimes flatter to deceive, and you probably better. Celtic might be better at this point, bringing in someone who can do the job. But again, I just don't know if that will happen. And if it doesn't happen, he could potentially be Aberdeen's new manager. Now, who is he essentially? Well, at the moment, he is the manager of essentially Man City's youth team. Their elite development squad is what it's called. So I don't know what that translates to. Under 23s, probably something like that. He's had a good history again of what we mentioned with Sean Maloney of going through staff at other places. So he was at an Italian club after he retired. He was then assistant at Sevilla, which was one of the clubs he played for. He was assistant at West Ham under Manuel Pellegrini, and now he's at the dev squad. And the thing is he doesn't just look like Pep Guardiola. He actually really idolizes Pep Guardiola. So if you're talking about wanting to have a good style of play, someone who is basically looking to take a lot and has learned from Pep Guardiola isn't necessarily a bad decision.
It's just the idea of trying to have Ash Taylor playing Pep Guardiola
I
style
imagine
of
Ash
football.
Taylor will be released if this happens.
We can
But
pray.
again, but another thing from that is a Pep Guardiola style isn't as simple as it was when he was at Barcelona. And you go, he plays tiki-taka. Pep Guardiola looks at what he has, and again, we're not getting Pep Guardiola, but again, this guy.
I was going to
this guy
say,
who
see if
follows the
someone
philosophy.
skipped in a bit.
I know, so no, but this is a guy who follows a philosophy of Pep Guardiola. He looks at what he has and he finds the system that best matches that. Yes, he has some things that he looks to follow in football. He's still very Johan Cruyff type in the way he wants to play football, which is that he wants it to be entertaining and nice on the eye. But he finds different ways. He's not set to a formation. So if that's what this guy is into, then that helps. One interesting fact about him as well, now, because since you had the one about Sean Maloney, is that he actually missed Derek McInnes at West Brom in 2000 by a few months. Derek McInnes joins in the summer of 2000. This guy left in the January. So, that just kind of makes you think there's some connection in the universe here. But one thing
connection missed by 2 months. What the fuck are you on about?
It's a connection, mate. One thing, the big thing here for me that shows a prototype of what you can do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be him, is if you get a guy who's just been at the academy level of Manchester City and has a good relationship with the people at Manchester City, at a club like Aberdeen, who sometimes need loans, you might be able to do that. Now, if it's Chidi and Wakali all over again, maybe you don't want a loan from Manchester City.
No,
but
get Chidi back.
I'm going to assume that they have some players a little bit better than him. So again, those connections I think help.
And
I think it's
fun. I said we loaned Bolton, and he's not great. So I guess I just loaned Scotland the bad ones.
I think at the end of the day with this guy, it is unlikely that it happened, but he's clearly shown that he wants to work his way up. He doesn't want to take too big of a jump too soon. Maybe even again, I'm not saying that he recognises that Celtic was too big of a jump, because if he gets offered that job over Aberdeen, he's taking it. But maybe if he sees that he's not going to get that job, he thinks, well, what if I go to Aberdeen? And then that is a progression from there. Again, it's someone who will look to use it as a stepping stone, but probably could be very worthwhile in doing it. Good style of football, good connections. Those are the important things there. Before we discuss our shortlists, so we're going to make a 5-man shortlist. We're going to include the manager that we talked about, or maybe not. Maybe you think that the manager you talked about is shit. I'm going to go through the odds. The odds starting to maybe start to reflect conversations that have been had between people, but are probably mostly guesswork at this point. On Sky Bet, where I'm looking, which again, I don't know if we should trust them, considering they listed an Aberdeen fan whose pal asked for them yesterday.
He was in the shortlist, actually.
He was in your shortlist. Well, take him out, mate, because he's getting Celtic.
I genuinely looked at him and I genuinely was like, oh, is that some like second division manager I've not heard of before?
So
I actually bet on it.
The favourite at evens is Stephen Glass. And again, that's the Atlanta United connection. You have to watch it there, because as soon as that goes wrong, people are going to be pissed off. You can already get that sort of a sense that people are starting to get a bit pissed off with Dave Cormack. And I don't think that would help if it just seems like it's a job for the boys type of thing. Does that mean he couldn't do well? I don't know. It's an interesting, again, it's about, I like coaches that go and learn somewhere and they bring different things to the table. It's not just someone who's managed in Scotland, never knew anything outside of Scotland. At least he's went and learned. But with his job as the Atlanta United 2 manager, he doesn't have an amazing record. Second favourite is Neil Lennon at 3-1. Then, as I said, this is why this probably isn't very reliable. Darren Fletcher at 4-1. I mean, he's just signed a new contract with Man United. Stephen Robinson at 8-1 is next. Then we've got Enzo Maresca. So again, it's just that point of he's 12-1, so it's a long shot, but the fact he's so far up in those odds means maybe a conversation's been had somewhere along the line. Paul Sheeran, who's going to be one of the caretakers at the moment, he's up there. Sean Maloney, 20-1. And these odds aren't even completely in order, because you've got Derek Adams, 16-1, who might be a bit of a shout. Then Jim Goodwin and Jody Morris. Derek Adams, actually a lot better in the last few years at England than he was at Ross County. But nonetheless, so that's kind of giving you a bit of the odds there. But it looks like Stephen Glass or Neil Lennon going off of those ones. But Stephen Glass is probably the absolute favourite. If you were saying a short list, and let's maybe try and do this a little bit of like a bit of what you would like, a bit of what's realistic. What are you saying? Just to get mine out of the way, I've got Maresca, I've got Stephen Glass, because clearly he's a consideration for him. I've got Sean Maloney, I've got Jim Goodwin, because they're going to be looking within the country. They're going to be looking at who's maybe possible there. And then I've also got someone I was tempted to talk about, which was Dan Crawley and his brother, who are without a job in England at the moment. We're kind of being banded around for the Sheffield Wednesday job. Doesn't seem to be very high up in the odds, but could be an interesting shout. Flem, what would your shortlist be?
I think realistically, for me, it'd be Lennon, Glass, and Goodwin. That's the realistic shout. Whereas I actually think Maloney and Wagner would be better.
Maloney, I don't think is as unrealistic as the other two, because, I mean, again, it comes down to papers talk, but there's clearly something behind this where they've went, Glass is definitely interested and Sean Maloney is keen. So someone talked to someone.
Yeah, I do feel like Lennon's gonna get the job, and like I just feel it. It's one of those things.
I said that. I put it in our group chat the night McInnes got sacked. I genuinely fancy Lenny. That sounded weird, but
I wouldn't like. I wouldn't go for Lennon personally, but it's just I don't know. As soon as I saw McInnes left, I was the same. I was like, Lennon's just been sacked.
There's a few not complimentary videos of me when Lennon was, I
not go
believe,
into that.
Hibernian manager.
Yeah. So basically, the thing with Lennon though, and this is kind of goes into my point. I don't think he's a bad football manager. I do think he was in over his head at Celtic, but he was doing decently well with Hibs, and it wasn't his football that got him sacked at Hibs. It was maybe part of it, but it wasn't the big reason. So he's not a bad football manager, but you've got the fans who already hate Neil Lennon from his time at Celtic, from his time.
He's a panto villain, though, is he?
He is, but this is where the problem happens. If Jim Goodwin comes in, starts all right, has a bad patch, the fans will stick to it. If Neil Lennon comes in and has a bad patch, they'll turn on him quicker than they turned on Derek McInnes, and that is saying something, because there was a section of our support that were turning on Derek McInnes after a draw at home 3 years ago. We can all agree that it all went really badly now, but there's a lot of people who turned on him a lot sooner than was probably necessary, and it would be worse with Neil Lennon. And on top of that, as I alluded to, at Hibs, he wasn't sacked because of his football. There was arguments at board level. You see his reaction when there was all that fallout about the COVID trip, as we'll call it. I don't know if it's worthwhile when there's all these other managers available. If you can get Sean Maloney, and I get that he doesn't have a managerial pedigree, why is the risks with Neil Lennon worth it?
Yeah, I agree.
I just feel like Lennon has the gift of the gab to get in there with an interview with Cormac, and Cormac will automatically love him.
Yeah, I don't disagree that it's potential it could happen. My argument is whether or not it's the right decision, but I do agree with you that
I know it won't be the right
could
decision.
Possibly happen. Again, I think we come down to the conclusion that Stephen Glass is probably the favourite, but there was a suggestion in some of the papers that maybe he would be interested in the director of football role.
That seemed to be the headlines today, rather than going for manager.
And you kind of get away with things a little bit at that role. You're not, the focus isn't as much on you. And again,
you're not doing the post-match interviews, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and maybe some of the concern with Stephen Glass does come back to, does he have it tactically? And if he's not the coach, then it's not going to matter. And then it's about bringing in a bit of a tactician. But then again, if you're already spending some decent money on a director of football, how much money do you have to bring in your manager? So who knows what way it's going to go here.
Yeah, I want to hear your short list, Greg.
Oh yeah,
I was going to say,
do it. On you go.
One name that you haven't mentioned is Robinson. I'm surprised neither of you's mentioned him. I feel like he could be plausible. Yeah, I feel like he's plausible. It's just I don't want the merry-go-round of names that get wheeled out for every job. I'd rather go for something interesting.
I think people.
I think Robinson's going to be there or thereabouts. I think Goodwin will be. I think Lennon would be. I'd quite like to see Maloney. And then Glass. There you go. There's 5.
I don't think people.
But then they could just whap out a random one. Then, like give it to Peanut or something.
The optics. What? We'll gloss over it.
What? Paul Sheeran's called Peanut.
Oh, of course, I know, but it's context, I forgot for a second, to be fair. I think the optics with Stephen Robinson are just interesting because Aberdeen have went for a couple Motherwell managers in the past.
Back to back.
Even then, people were like, why are we shopping for our managers? Craig Brown McGee. People were like, why are we shopping for our managers at Motherwell? So now that was, taking a successful Motherwell manager to take one who, and actually Stephen Robinson was very successful at Motherwell, but the whole point is to take a sacked Motherwell manager who doesn't have good optics. And I actually don't think it's
exactly
as bad as it sounds. I think he is a manager who's pretty flexible in some ways and had some impressive times and did very well in the cups, which is important. But I don't see that being a smart idea.
I think the big thing is just have a bit of inspiration behind it, be a bit more exciting. Don't go for the safe. It sounds harsh to say, but don't go in the safe option of a Robinson or someone else like of that ilk. Go for someone maybe a bit more exciting that's going to get fans, because they're going to be. This is what's going to sell season tickets for next season as well.
Yep.
Which is a big factor. And
in the summer.
Yeah, so I feel like just be a bit more inspiring with it. Please don't be bold and go for, like I say, the merry-go-round of Scottish managers.
Well then, we'll see what happens. tell us.
There you go. I gave you a clip for Twitter there. You're welcome.
Tell us your predictions as to who is going to be the next Aberdeen manager, and give us like 3 of them, right? Tell us who the dream one is, tell us who the absolute worst case scenario is, and tell us who Aberdeen will probably
Presley. Presley's the worst option. I saw him
worst
getting
case
linked today.
scenario is definitely Presley.
He can. I don't know if are we swearing on these, but he can fuck so far off.
Where we are now.
That's the Twitter clip.
That's definitely the Twitter clip. I think Presley's the worst. Best case scenario is a few of the ones we mentioned. Personally, for me, I'm going to go Maresca, but it could be Sean Maloney. It could be Darren Fletcher. For some reason, Sky still seem to think there's some chance of him. And then the realistic is clearly Stephen Glass.
Yeah.
But hopefully he brings his nice wee bike that he got in that cup final.
Oh, aye. Coca-Cola. I'd love that bike. Imagine him kicking up and down Union Street doing delivery with that.
And on that note, thanks for watching, and hopefully the next Aberdeen manager or Stephen Presley hasn't been watching either.